So this is the site, and I would like to finish the site. And by finish, what I mean by that is adding the street and then adding some trees, probably a fence around my property, and definitely some of the conceptual masses that I've already made, and I'll drop them into my model. I'll begin with the street, and I don't need to put it all the way around. I just need to put it into the areas where I believe I'm going to see it in my model when I generate my views. Only in the areas that pertain to what I'm doing, I'll focus on that. So for the street, I will go ahead and begin right here at this location by the corner. And I'd like to extend the street out, I'd say at least 20 feet. I don't want to model anything on the other side of the street because it's not really necessary at this point. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and draw a line. So I'm going to type L and then draw a line from this endpoint right here. And I'll take it across, and I'll take it across at least, let's say 25 feet. So I'm typing in 25 feet for the length, and then I'll enter. So that gives me that location. I want to go ahead and tap the escape key and draw another line over on this side. And I'll also make that 25 feet. And then tap the escape key, make that go away. And now what I'll do is draw a rectangle. So I'll come up here to my rectangle. Since I've already established this endpoint, I'll click here and take it over, and I'll just place it at this endpoint here. And then I'll do the same thing on the opposite side. The reason I drew the lines was to capture, or at least give myself an endpoint there to work with. From this endpoint, I'll take it over and then diagonal. Zoom in and click on this endpoint. And now I need to establish that radius line right here because I'm about to join these two. I call it joining, but I just want to bring them together. Here's what I could do. I could simply draw a line from here across. I'm going to constrain to the green axis by using my left arrow key. I'll click here. And then I'll continue over. And you'll notice it's still not filled in because I need to close it right where I have the arc. Let me tap the space bar, come in over here, and then I'm going to draw an arc. I'll go to my arc tool right here. Number of sides, I believe I selected 24 the last time. So I'm going to type 24 to keep them the same. And I'll pick this as my center point. I'll click over here and establish that as the first point of the arc. And then I'll take it across. You don't see it getting drawn, but it's in there. If I bring my cursor over here, you'll see that it continues, but I just want to stop it right there. So I'll click. And as soon as I click, I can zoom out and I can see that I have completed that part of the street. Let me tap the space bar and then type E to use the erase tool and erase this line and this one. And then right away, I will tap my space bar and triple click on this street and make a group out of it. So triple click, right click, make group. And I'm going to add a material. And I'll probably keep it the same material as my alley. I'll expand my materials over on my default tray. I'm going to come over here to the eyedropper to sample a paint on the model. So I click on that and I'm sampling this paint right here, this material. And then I'd like to apply it to this group by clicking on it. So that's the street. Use my space bar and come in over here. And I'll take a look at this and everything is flat. There's nothing three-dimensional about my model just yet. But I want to give it some depth because the street is usually down, and I'm going to say at least 6 inches below. I want to move that entire street down 6 inches. So I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to select that group. And then I'm going to use my M key on the keyboard. So type M, and I'll pick this endpoint right here. And I'd like to move it down, but I want to make sure that it's going down. So I'm going to use the blue axis. I'm going to constrain to it, and I'm going to use the up arrow. And I'd like to move it in this direction. So I take my cursor, moving it down like this, and I type 6 and enter. And then tap the space bar. Gets me back to the selection key, and then I can zoom in here. And you can see that it has moved down 6 inches. But now I need to fill in this gap. So what I'll do is I'll select my curb, and then I'll give it a double click so I can edit the curb. And now I'm going to push pull it down. I'm going to type P, hover over this surface, click on it, and bring it down, and I'll let it align to this endpoint, which is my street. So I'll give it a click. I'll do the same thing with the curb here. Click on it and bring it down, let it align, and then over here as well. So I'm letting my site be somewhat conceptual here. And I know that the corner probably should slope down and meet the street, but for now, this is going to be enough for our purposes because we're really not going to see the details near the intersection here. Now I'm going to click, nope, before I click, I'm going to tap the space bar, and now I'm going to click away from this group. And now when I look at it, you can see that the street has been moved down. If you'd like, you don't need to do this, but if you'd like, just to give a little bit more depth, if you look outside right now, you'll see that there is a difference between the street and the grass. In some instances, the sidewalk might be higher up than the grass. In some cases, it might be lower. If you want to give yourself that type of a depth, go ahead and make the changes. This is entirely up to you. So for example, if I double click my sidewalk, I can take this sidewalk and then type P and click on the surface and bring it up right here, let's say 1 inch. So I type 1 and enter. And then I will tap my space bar, and then I'll click off of the group. And in this case, I'm just clicking up here on the screen. And notice how that gives me a little bit of height. It may help, it may not make a difference. I just want to show you what you can do here. And if that's not something you want to do, that's okay. I'll go ahead and edit, undo that. And I'll go back a couple of times. If you'd like to do it to your grass, then go ahead and double click it and then type P for push pull. Take that up again, just 1 inch, and then go ahead and tap the space bar and then click off of it. So that could happen also. It's up to you, whatever you decide. And yes, you might be looking at this and you might say to yourself, well, that's too perfect of an edge. I agree, but we're just simply modeling here and we're doing conceptual mass modeling. It's just to give an indication of what this site could look like. And if you don't want to do that, and you'd like to leave everything alone, that's fine too. Just trying to throw out some options here for you in case you would like to embellish a bit. I'm now going to import my conceptual mass models. I will come over here to File. I will select Import. In my folder, there's the conceptual masses that I created a while back. And I'm simply going to import them. And you can see they're coming in. And what I like to do is not really worry too much about where I'm going to be placing them or where they land right now, because I can adjust that in a little bit. But to make sure that they're on the same surface as my site and the other sites here, I'll go ahead and click where it says on face in group. So once I click, they're brought in. But now they're acting as one single object. And if I look over at the entity info, they're behaving as one single component. And I need to change that because I need to place these buildings on the other sites. So I can go and tap my space bar. And now I can right click and I will explode this component. Done. Now that I've exploded the component, I can go ahead and select this figure and delete. And then I can take my buildings and start placing them on the sites. So I'll start with this one first. I'll take that and I'd like to place it somewhere on this site closest to the screen right now in the foreground here. So I'm simply going to move it and I'll type M and I'll pick it right here at this endpoint, this corner, and I'll bring it right over here and align it to the corner of this property. I place it there because now it's easier for me to go ahead and move it an exact distance. I'm orbiting around here and I'm going to check the distance that I have between the building and the property. So I'll click on my tape measure from this point over and I have 10 feet. So I'd like to center it on the property there. So I'm going to be moving it 5 feet over. So let me tap the escape key and then tap the space bar. And now type M since it's still selected. And I'll move it from this corner over and I'll simply type in 5 feet and enter. And this is an apartment building and it shouldn't really be on the property like that. So I'm going to set it back a little bit. So I'm going to move it from this corner and I'll push it back, and 5 feet seems like an okay distance. So it's snapping to 5 feet since that's what I typed in a second ago. I'll keep that distance. All I have to do is click because it's showing that distance for me. So I'll click and I have that building in place. Now it's time to put the other two buildings in. Tapping the space bar, and then I will click on this building here. I'll go ahead and type M, pick it from this corner and place it over here on this corner. I'd like to place it on this adjacent lot, but I had to put it here first again because I wanted to snap to an exact location. Now what I'm going to do is rotate that building. I'll go over here to my rotate tool. And I'd like to make sure that I rotate it about the blue axis. So as long as my compass icon there remains blue, I'm in good shape. And if I want to force it to stay on blue, I use my up arrow key. So I type the up arrow key, I click this point here, the corner, and I'd like to rotate it from this corner over and have it line up right there on that edge. So I click on it. And then I'll orbit again. I'm now going to type M and I'm going to move it back. And this time I'm simply going to click on a point out here like this, and I'll move it straight back. In my case, it's along the red axis, and I'd like it to go back 20 feet. And then I'm just going to move it 5 feet in from that property. So from this point here, I'm going to move it over. I clicked on it and I typed 5 feet, enter, and that's all set. And now I'm going to take the garage and align it with my conceptual mass there. So I'm going to tap the space bar, selecting the garage now, typing M, and then I'm going to take it from this corner, bring it over, and I want it to line up. So I'm going to use my left arrow key to constrain it to the green axis. And then I'm going to select this endpoint right here. And it's constrained, so it's going to align. And now I'm going to take the garage and I'm going to move it from this corner over. And I'll go ahead and use the right arrow key so that it constrains to the red axis. And I'll have it line up with my property right there. Now, the garage doesn't exactly sit on the alley like that. It's usually in about a foot or even 2 feet. So now I'm just going to take it and click on this corner and bring it in, and I'll type in 2 feet, enter. So that's in a position where I believe it's going to be okay. And now I have one more building to move. I'll use my space bar, select this building, and I can either move it and then rotate or rotate and then move. Since I've already moved and rotated this other building, I'll go ahead and rotate this one first. Can I type R? No, the R does not work. So I will definitely have to click on the rotate icon and make sure it's locked to the blue axis. I'll pick this point here, this corner, and then I'm going to select this corner and rotate it around this way so that it lines up. And I'm trying to get it to line up to red. There we go. Now it's lined up to red. Right there. Next thing I'm going to do is type M. And I'm going to move it from this endpoint, this corner here, over. I'm going to use my right arrow key to constrain it to red and have it line up with this building. And then I'll move it from this endpoint here over so that it lines up with that edge. And then one more move from there, from this endpoint over, and I'll just type in 5 feet like that. Let me tap the space bar and then click away from the object. These are nice pieces of property, wide lots, and they have a little bit of room there on the side. So it's looking good. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is make some copies here just to populate this. And it's up to you what you'd like to do. If you think there needs to be another apartment building like this on one of the lots, go ahead. I have mine selected. I'll type M for move. I'll go ahead and click on this endpoint right here of the lot, bring it over, tap the control key once, and I'm making a copy of it right here. And then I also want to fill in the other lots. I'm going to tap the space bar, and I'd like to make copies of this garage as well as the buildings and kind of mix things up a little bit. I'll get to the garages in just a second. I'm going to select this building here, and I'm going to type M, and I'm going to click on this endpoint here, tap the control key. I'll make a copy right there. And then I'll do the same thing, clicking on this endpoint here, tap the control key. I'll make a copy of that over here. The next building, I'll keep the same one for me. So I'll click on this endpoint, tap the control key, and copy it there. Now, in terms of the garage, I want to do this a little quicker, and you can see me orbiting about. Let me click on my select tool and then click off of my object. And now I'm going to look at the garage here. I know that I want to make multiple copies of this garage, and I'm counting the number of lots that I have. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lots. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get this into position here. I'm going to select my garage and I'm going to move it. So I'm going to type M, and I'll pick this endpoint here of this lot, and I'll move it over to this point. I'll make sure to tap the control key, and I'm going to click one time. And as soon as I do that, without touching anything, I'm going to use my asterisk, and I'm going to, you can see in the distance text box there, I have the asterisk, which means multiply, and I'm going to type 5 because I want to multiply this by 5 times. So now I'm going to enter, and I have made a total of 5 copies, and they're all in the same location. They're equally distance apart from each other. That's one way to make multiple copies. Now that I've done that, if you recall, and let me go ahead and tap the space bar so I can get out of that mode. And I could put a garage over here as well. In fact, watch what I'm going to do, because that's an apartment building, right? So maybe they need a bigger garage. So I'm going to take this one here. I'm going to make a copy of it. So I'm going to move it. I type M, and I'd like to move it from this endpoint over to this one, tap the control key, and it gives me my copy. So I'll click. Now what I'd like to do is actually edit this one. I am going to tap the space bar. That way I'm out of that tool. And I'm going to give this garage here a double click. And now I can isolate it and I can focus on just this one. I'd like to make it wider, but before I do that, I'm going to check the distance because I forgot. So using my tape measure, I'll pick this endpoint right here, and I can see that it's 20 feet wide. Now, if I go 20 feet wide in the other direction, it's not going to fit. I think I'm just going to add 10 feet to it, just to make it wider. It'll be a 30-foot wide garage. Now I'll go ahead and use my space bar. And now I'm going to click on this surface, and I'm going to move it. So I'm going to type M, and I'll pick this endpoint here, and I'll move it across. I'll move it over. It's locking into the green axis, but to make sure it does constrain to it, I'll use my left arrow key, and I'll bring it over a distance of 10 feet. So I type 10 feet, enter. But now that roof is not centered anymore. I will try to use my space bar here and click off of my group. All right, take a look at it. And I need to move this point right here where those 4 lines intersect. I need to move that over not 10 feet, but half of 10 feet, which would be 5 feet. I'll double click again to edit this group. And now before I select anything, I'm simply going to select my move tool. And I'll be really careful here. I don't want to pick a face. I don't want to pick an edge. I want to pick an endpoint, this one right here. So once it shows me endpoint, I'll click and then I'll move it. And to make sure I constrain to green, I'll use my left arrow key, and that's a distance of 5 feet. So I typed in 5 feet and I entered, and that's what I get. So now I can go ahead and tap my space bar and then click off of that group. And I have taken a garage as an example, and I have modified it to look different. So those are the buildings on that side. And what I'd like to do now is actually place buildings on my other property. You're more than welcome to make copies of the buildings here, change it all around, whatever you'd like to do. Here's what I will do right now just to make things, I don't want to say quicker, but to show you and reinforce this concept of using the scale tool. Watch what I'm going to do here. I'm going to select all of these objects. So I'm going to hold down my shift key, and I'll pick this one, and I'll just go through selecting them all. Now that I have them selected, I will go ahead and right click and make a group. And I want to make a group so that I can edit the group. I have to first of all copy it over. So I'm going to type M, and I'll simply move it from a point somewhere over here, and I'll bring it over to this side. And in fact, I'm actually going to bring it completely away from the site. I'm going to tap the control key, and then I'm going to click right there. So I've made my copy. The next thing to do, since they're still highlighted, is to come over here and use my scale tool. So I'm going to scale this, and I'm going to make sure that I pick this point right here, which is in the middle. I have to pick this one so it works out just right. So I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to bring it over to the opposite side. And I'm going to bring it over, and I'm going to change the scale to -1. And notice how it wants to snap to that -1. You can go ahead and click right there, but I'm going to type -1 and enter. And now I have flipped it, if you will, to the opposite side. All right, and now it's just a matter of putting it into place. I'm simply going to type M, take it from this origin point over here, make sure I lock into red by using my right arrow key, tap that. And I'd like to lock it in so that it aligns to this intersect here, this point. And then from there, I know I can move it again. And this time I'll pick right here outside. And I'd like to bring it over 2 feet. 2 feet because that was the same distance I had on the opposite side. And when you look down an alley. This is more or less what they look like. The garages are more or less in alignment there. You're more than welcome to move them around a little bit if you'd like to, just to give it some sense of, I guess, reality, but it's not necessary. I no longer need this group over here, so I'm going to right click and explode it. And when I explode the group, it's going to break down to its individual parts, which happen to be made up of other groups. So I'll explode, and you can see all the individual groups. And then I'll make sure to tap my space bar and then click away from my objects so none of them are selected. And now I'll come back over here, and as promised, you can move these around. I'll go ahead and take this one. Well, that's still a group. So let me right click that and explode it. It doesn't need to stay a group. And now click off of the objects. And now I'm going to select this one, hold down my shift key, perhaps pick this one and that one. And now I'm going to move them, just panning over. I'll type M and I'll click right here on the face there on that surface. And I'd like to move them back 1 foot. It doesn't look like it's much of a difference, but it's subtle enough. And I just wanted to show you what you can do. Tap the space bar again, and then click off of the objects. And just like that, we are populating that site. And the building is going to be placed right here. And as soon as I start to generate some views, right? Let's say, for example, I'd like to look at my building standing from the sidewalk here, this intersection. Notice how the buildings back here are starting to cover up that horizon line. And we need that because let's say, for example, I'm standing right here, right? You see this? If I position my camera, let's say here, let me do this. All right, if I position the camera right there, and let's say I have the buildings here, but nothing over there. This is empty. And my eye gets pulled all the way back to that horizon line. And it really makes my site look like it's floating on an island, really nowhere. So I need to ground it. And that's why I had asked you, and we practiced doing these conceptual masses, so that when we take the views of the site, you put your camera somewhere here, for example, and you can see how the buildings really, really help. You're more than welcome also at this point, if you'd like to add some color to these buildings. I can now come over here to my materials. I'll go to colors named. And I'm going to pick some colors, but not bright colors. I need something subtle. And for example, if I want some buildings to look as if they're masonry, I'm going to pick a color that's a light brown. So for example, like this one right here, I'll pick it and I'll color this building and I'll color that one and maybe this one, and then go with a different shade of brown. This one, for example, and I'll color this building and perhaps that one and that one. And then pick other colors as well to give them a little bit of a different look. In my garages as well. So maybe this garage will be that color. And that's a little too bright for me. So maybe I'll tone it down to that color. And I'm staying within these warm colors, but you don't have to, because if we look at our city, if we look at our urban environment, the colors vary. They go from browns to grays and so on. So you can mix them in. Here, for example, I can pick this light gray and I can make that garage a light gray. Same with this one and this one. I'm being real arbitrary. Maybe I'll go with an even lighter gray here and there, and then maybe a darker gray. Let's say that building, a darker gray, and this garage, a darker gray, and that one as well. Mix it up. And then you'll see when you go back, the colors really help out. The next thing I'd like to do is add some trees. So let me zoom this out a little bit, tap my space bar, and head over to my 3D warehouse. So I'll go to 3D warehouse here. And what I'd like to do is search for trees. So I type trees and enter. I want my file size to be small. So I'm going to change that so it keeps it within a smaller range, let's say somewhere around 0 to 10 megs. The polygons also, I want to keep that to a small size. And I would say anywhere from 0 to about 10K. And then I'm going to look at the trees. And I'll take, for example, this one. I'll take a look at it. I'll click on it. And it tells me one material, one polygon. This is the file size, 696 kilobits. That's not bad. So I'll go ahead and download that one. The last thing you want to do is download something with a lot of information because it'll really slow your drawing down. I'm going to click on download. I'd like to load it into my model. Yes. And then I'm going to place it in my parkway here. And now you can see the tree. It's two-dimensional, and that's fine. Let me go ahead and tap the space bar and then click off of the object. And every time I turn the camera, the tree is facing me, and that's okay. We simply want it there to give us a sense of landscape, to give us a sense that we have trees there, and also to help reinforce the scale. I can go back to the warehouse and see if there's other trees, perhaps maybe from that same group or a different group. So I believe I picked, from one of those. Oh, this one, Land FX. So if I go to Land FX, and it's taking me over to the browser, right? And I can see all the different examples. And maybe I want to go with this category or with this group. It's up to you. You can try these things out. Or you can mix and match a little bit more. Well, here's a tree. It's also from Land FX. So that one probably could work. So I'll click on that. And yes, and you'll see this one, 1 meg. And that's how big the image is. And that's fine. Just be real careful because, like I said, this could slow down your file a bit. So I'll go ahead and download that one. Yes, load directly into my model. And you can see how big it is. Not bad. And I'll tell you why, because I can take that tree and I can bring it over here and I can place it perhaps in this property right there. Notice how it's facing me. There we go. And then I can also take that tree, move it. And when I say move, I really mean copy. So I'll type, let's see, M, and I'll move it from here. And then I'll type the control key, or I'll tap it and I'll copy it right there. Make another copy of that. So move it from here, tap control key, bring it over, perhaps place it right there. And the reason for that is because I'll go back to my property, right? I'm going to be right there. And you can see how the trees really help reinforce, number one, the sense of scale, but also add some green to that background, which is very helpful. I can take this tree here that I have in the foreground and perhaps place that in one of the backyards. So let me use my space bar, select this tree, and then type M, move it from that point, tap the control key, and then bring it over and perhaps place it right here in this backyard. And then I think what I'd like to do is to also move it, or make a copy, that is, from here, tap the control key, and I'll put it on the side of my property there in that parkway. So I'm starting to populate this site. And you can see it didn't have a lot of information before, but now it's really starting to look like a site. And this is creating the backdrop to the model.